Hi everyone, here's the Book Chemist once again. Today I'm reviewing La Straniera, Strangers I Know by Claudia Durastanti, the last novel I read in 2024 and one of my favorite from the entire year. I actually recently included it in the list of the 20 books that I like the most from 2024. I've called this a novel, although its generic status is actually a little ambiguous. As far as I can tell, based on just a handful of online searches and interviews that I've read, this is the novel's events are based on the author's own experience, but they were recounted and the book was written with a certain novelistic flair and a certain novelistic sense of liberty. Indeed, the book itself is aware of the eternal complications and paradoxes of truth and narrative, and it remarks on them both in its unforgettable final paragraph and even in its opening chapters. The book opens with two different conflicting versions of how the protagonist's parents first met. I'm not sure how I feel about autofiction, about this genre that blurs the line between memoir and the novel and fiction. Part of me, perhaps my unenlightened opinion, is that it feels a bit more like a publishing trend than a whole new genre in its own right. But I will say that it has definitely produced some of the most interesting and stimulating books of the last few years, including this one. A lot of La Straniera, especially in the early part of the novel, I'm gonna call it novel, is dedicated to talking about the protagonist's experience as the mostly able-bodied daughter of two deaf parents, two parents with disabilities. The treatment, Durastanti's treatment of disability is very refreshing and very captivating because it's very frank and candid. The narrator is very honest when it comes to detailing her disappointments and her difficulties as the daughter of disabled parents, in a way that doesn't take away her parents' disabilities, because they are, up to a point, defining features of these people, but also doesn't make them the defining features of these characters. They're not defined or limited by their disabilities. And to me, perhaps the clearest testament of this in the novel is that for large chunks of the novel, especially later on, it's actually very easy to forget that these two characters, the protagonist's father and mother, actually cannot hear. They have this disability. It's very easy to forget it in the suspended world of the narrative as you reconstruct this, what you're writing inside your head. At least it was, that's how I experienced the book. Perhaps part of the reason why it was easy to forget this is that the narrator's parents are such interesting characters in their own right, and such problematic characters too. They are both artistic, temperamental characters with a strong independent streak, and especially the protagonist's father is very charismatic, but he is also a very difficult man and at times an abusive husband and father. Is he a husband? I'm not sure he was ever married to the protagonist's mother. An abusive partner and father, I should say. In this sense, La Straniera, beyond its treatment of disability, is very much a book about family, about the hang-ups and the disappointments and the strange affections that develop between people who are bound to live together for decades and to share difficult, constrained situations, to face the challenges of life together. In this treatment, again, it's very honest, very relatable and very valuable, precisely because it's so frank and refreshing. The other, perhaps defining feature of the protagonist's life is that she grew up as somebody who was split between two very difficult geographical realities, between Brooklyn, where she was born and she lived until she was 6, and where she also spent the summers of her childhood, and between provincial southern Italy, where her mother moved with her and her brother when the protagonist was 6. It's where she went to school, where she spent most of the year growing up. And this exposed to the different dynamics and the different challenges of these two different worlds. For instance, she describes how in Italy she was actually one of the poorest kids in her school, but she also had the fancy American shoes that all the other kids envied her. As somebody who moved from Italy to the UK, which is a different place altogether, but in my mind at least, it often resembles the US more than it does continental Europe, I've also started noticing the weird ways in which poverty and luxury register in different cultures. And I found this topic very interesting and fascinating, especially the way it was treated in the book. However, as I mentioned when I discussed this book in my top 20 from last year, this description, the fact that this is a book about growing up with disabled parents and it's a book about growing up between two different countries, will probably give you the wrong sense of what kind of novel you're going to read here. The truth is that it's very difficult to explain away Strangers I Know, because it doesn't really resemble many novels that I've read. It's a very original treatment that really does justice to what was really a very unconventional life. Even the structure of the book doesn't follow a linear narrative at all. The book is divided into sections called family, travels, health, so on and so forth. And these are the sections that follow the way horoscopes are usually presented in newspapers. Just like another book about horoscopes and astrology, which is Olga Tokarczuk's Drive Your Plow Over the Bones of the Dead, my impression here is that the book used horoscopes, used this outmoded and discredited way to knowledge as a way of looking at a life from an original and different perspective, which is something extremely refreshing in a time such as ours, which feels very positivistic, where everybody feels as if they know intimately what is truth and what is false. And because all of us are so convinced and so entrenched within our truths, it's probably why we're at each other's throat at every election cycle. Strangers I Know is very much a book about how languages shape our cultures and our identities, and about being somebody who's split between different languages, and really in the protagonist's case, even between different ways of expressing our inner world, of bringing what's inside us into reality and communicating it to others. In one of the most significant passages or memorable passages in the book, the protagonist talks about her mother saying "non sento niente," which in Italian could mean both "I don't hear anything" and "I don't feel anything." The same sentence covers both possibilities. And the protagonist explains how impossible it is to translate into English, to capture into English the feelings that this sentence, this saying, elicited in her whenever her mother was saying it. It's a beautiful book about the complexities and paradoxes of translation, and while I haven't read the English translation by Elizabeth Harris, I did sample some of the maybe most significant passages in the book in the English translation in a bookshop, and my impression was that the English translation really did an impeccable job with them. What I can say about La Straniera is that it shouldn't work as a book, even though it really does. It's a book that doesn't really have a unified narrative momentum behind it, but it's a collection of remarkable episodes and snapshots from a person's life. It's a story about growing up and having to cope with disabilities, especially in others, in people that we love. It's a story about professional success and failure, about our thirst for meaning, about love in a long-term relationship. All of this is gonna make it sound as if it's a bit unfocused, maybe a bit sentimental, maybe even soppy, but it really isn't. It's a brave book, but it never feels arrogant, even at its gutsier. It's very funny, it's very warm. It's not just an amazing novel, but it's a really good reminder of quite how malleable the novel is as an art form and as a means of exploring our experiences and our individual stories. I was really impressed with this. It blew me away. I'm definitely going to read the other books by Claudia Durastanti that are already out, and I look forward to that. If you've read Strangers I Know, please let me know what you thought in the description box. Were you equally smitten? Did you have any reservations? I definitely recommend it to anybody who's looking for a refreshing read, who once again is going to excite you and make you look at the novel as a medium anew. Thanks as always for watching the review. I always appreciate it, and Bye everybody.